Please be seated. We resume our order paper at questions, and I have an urgent question in the name of the Honourable Member for Middle, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure whether the Crogga Petroleum licence has now expired, whether there's any intention to renew it, and if not, would that mean that we're unlikely to ever establish whether we own a commercial gas field in our own territorial waters?
I want the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his question. I can confirm that the Seawood Production Innovate licence, which existed between DRI and Crogga Limited, expired at 11:59 p.m. on Friday the 28th of February 2025. There is no intention to renew the licence. It would be possible to establish if there was a commercial gas field in the island's territorial waters by undertaking the relevant surveys, including a 3D seismic survey and an exploratory well drill.
Mr. Peters, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that it was the will of both Tynwald and Comyn that this project be progressed, why has it taken over 6 years of delays for it to fail in what seems to be a death by 1,000 cuts? For example, the requirement for Crogga to sign a blank cheque to compensate Ørsted is not industry standard practice and seriously compromise Crogga's chances of market funding.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have indeed been a number of delays in this licence progressing. Many of those are because Crogga themselves have had to request further extensions, which the Department has considered and granted in all cases. And in fact, the Department was offering an extension right up until Friday for Crogga to continue with the project. With regards to the blank cheque that the Honourable Member has referenced, I think he's talking about the coexistence and compensation agreements. That has been the subject of extensive cooperation between the Department and Crogga and other parties, running on from January 24 and continuing all the way through the year, where the Department has facilitated coexistence and cooperation agreements, and in fact the company themselves accepted the need for those agreements early in 2024.
Mr. Collister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the information this morning. Can I ask the Minister who made the final decision on Friday? Was it the Department, the Minister herself, or the Council of Ministers?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The final decision on Friday was made by the Board of Directors of Crogga, who met on Friday morning and informed us at 11:49 that they would not be signing the extension agreement.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. I think it would be helpful for the Minister to answer Mr. Collister's question, though, because the Minister of Infrastructure can't act without the consent of the Energy Policy Board, which is a subcommittee of Council of Ministers. So I think that would be helpful to answer that question. Can the Minister confirm that she remembers that on 28th of April 2022, which is before the date she just gave of January 2024, Crogga made an irrevocable commitment on the basis that it understood that there was an agreement for lease with Ørsted for the development of an offshore wind farm adjacent to and overlapping the Crogga hydrocarbon block. It continues for the whole of the rest of that paragraph, and in actual fact, the 2015 principles which the Crown Estates have used were already well in place and well known by old Crogga.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. With reference to the second part of that question, I think there have been numerous touch points at which Crogga knew that coexistence and cooperation was needed around operating this block, and I thank the Honourable Member for referencing that one, which is even earlier in the time frame. There's also a ministerial declaration that covers this aspect as well. With response to Mr. Collister's question, and reiterated by Mr. Thomas, Comyn were advised of the position of the Department that we were willing to issue an extension to the licence, and Comyn were content with that.
Supplementary question, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much public money has been spent in terms of officer time and external consultants, and why was the allegedly necessary legislation and regulation so delayed? It actually took Leo Tolstoy less time to write War and Peace. Why did we not simply adapt and adopt UK NSTA and health and safety regulations?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Legislation around this area has been progressing at pace, and considerable resources have been inputted into this project. I agree with the Honourable Member. I'd like to know exactly how much has been spent so far in officer time, and as this project has been going on now for over 6 years, that I imagine that will be a considerable amount, and I have asked officers to see if we can estimate what the costs have been to government. With regards to the legislation being progressed, whether that legislation was compliant with the UK legislation, that was indeed the basis that not only my department but other departments have been working from as well, and that legislation would have essentially been transferred over to the Isle of Man as and when it was required. There was and remains a credible plan in place that legislation would be delivered at the time points that was needed. So it is not true to say that we didn't have a legislation. In fact, the 3D seismic survey could have happened in 2019. It just didn't.
Yeah. Supplementary, Ms Lord Brennan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Early last week, Tuesday morning, I did write to the Minister to ask her what could be done, what will she do in respect of the concerns that had been made around regulations and also compensation. I didn't get a response, so I will ask the question again. What did she seek to do in order to bring this matter to a positive conclusion? And does she agree that actually having access to our own gas supply could be something that is major for island energy security and also transformative in terms of revenue for the island? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There were ongoing and daily communications between the legal team operating on behalf of the Department and the Isle of Man Government with Kroger and their legal team in order to work through the issues that had been raised. I apologise if I didn't respond to the member, but there were some complex negotiations going on around this at the time. The clauses around compensation and coexistence were actually drafted back in November. Kroger had sight of those in December when it decided that it wanted to change what it was asking for again and vary the order that the licence was being carried out in. So those clauses, they didn't express any concern over at the time. However, as it got closer to agreeing at the end of February, that seemed to become one of their problems. So can you remind me the second part, please?
Would she not acknowledge that it's in the interests of energy security and significant funds to the Isle of Man to resolve these matters?
So, thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the honourable member. We were referencing security of supply. My understanding was that the latest round of plans actually involved taking the gas line join into UK pipelines and processing the gas onshore there. So I am uncertain that there would ever have been any direct gas supply to the island as part of this, but plans have changed a number of times over the years, and I don't think that matter had been settled yet.
I have now a full list out to 13 supplementaries, so I'm closing my list, but next on it is Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My colleague from Middle talked about the public investment in this project. Can I ask the Minister just two small questions? Can the Minister probably confirm how much the Department has spent on legal fees dealing with this matter? There's also a number of local shareholders that's been affected. Does the Minister have any details on how many local shareholders are going to be affected by this and the total amount that's been invested in this project by local residents on the island? And if she doesn't have that information, can she provide it in writing?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I've already mentioned, I have asked for what our costs have been to date on this, and so I don't have the data about the legal fees, but I will undertake to share that once I know. As regards the local shareholders, Kroger is a private company. Their shareholders are a matter for them, and they are not a matter for us. We don't have a list of shareholders for them, so I don't know how many, and nor do I know what their investment is, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to commit to finding that out.
Right. Ms Edge, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know the Minister said that legislation is progressing at pace. She's also said that in November of this year, Kroger had information with regards to the compensation, etc. requirements, and December. However, we're only in February when they have to make a decision on that very commercial position. But can the Minister confirm whether there's been any issues with the Ørsted licence that has hindered Kroger's progress?
We're starting to broaden this out. This is very much about the Kroger Petroleum licence. Minister.
Well, it's about compensation, I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are various touch points where compensation and coexistence discussions have happened. My honourable member, Mr Thomas, has already cited earlier instances of that, and I believe that Kroger have been aware of this pretty much for the duration of their licence since 1st of January 2019. So my reference to last November was that that's when the exact clauses were placed in the draft agreement at that time for a further extension, and that was offered on the basis that Kroger wanted to drill and then do the 3D seismic, which was a change in the order from standard industry practice. So as part of that, they would have seen those, but they were party to those. And what I really want to stress is that the DOI has facilitated meetings between Ørsted and Kroger about coexistence and cooperation over working on Manx territorial waters and on the seabed for a number of months. And those meetings have been regular, they have been productive, and the parties were working together to deal with this.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. Can the Minister advise, even for the public record afterwards, when the Territorial Seas Committee and the Energy Policy Board considered the decision that she made and advised the Council of Ministers? Secondly, can the Minister confirm that consultants have been hired? It's not just officer time, so I think it's a matter of public record that hundreds of thousands has been spent on legal advice and on technical advice about geology. Thirdly, does the Minister agree with my recollection that Kroger has had 3 regulated consents for seismic surveys during the life of its licence? They're obviously from DEFA, but she was obviously a member of DEFA during that time. And finally, has the Minister ever been briefed that before this 1995 regulation session in Tynwald, there was actually an energy commission that was working for 3 years, and there was actually a secondee from the UK authorities that was paid for by the United Kingdom, I believe, to come to develop those regulations. So I think the developing the regulations back in the 90s was roughly equivalent to what it's been now. It was on a needs basis.
Starting to get way beyond the question, which is the licence, an intention to renew it. And if not, that would mean that we can never establish whether we own a commercial gas field in our own territorial waters. Minister to reply.
I'll try and pick the bones out of that one. I'll have to advise the Minister about the dates for Territorial Seas and Energy Policy Board. He is indeed right, there have been a number of consultants' reports. This was the first and the only hydrocarbon licence that the Department has been managing. It would be reckless to have us assumed that officers were able to offer their advice and direction without external consultants involved, and I have asked for the cost of that. Kroger indeed have held a number of regulated consents for seismic, although as a member of DEFA I had nothing to do with that very much. And the legislation in the 1990s that governs this sector has moved on apace in the UK. Isle of Man legislation did not move on to match it because there was no requirement to do it, and as every honourable member will know in here, legislative drafting time is usually at a premium, and we use our legislative capacity to deal with the things that are there on a priority basis. So I think it probably would have been unreasonable to have expected previous administrations to update legislation for which there was no purpose at the time.
Ms Lord Brennan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a follow-on from my previous question. I appreciate that the Minister's only been in post since November, but can I ask the Minister why she never really saw this as a priority, and given her previous answer to me that seemed to indicate that matters are simply left at officer level, what political direction or focus on this there has been, acknowledging that the responsibility on the part of the licence sits with the DOI and the requirements in law also sit with the DOI. So where's the urgency? What's been the political decision? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr. Reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In fact, I am going to contradict the honourable member. Far from not seeing this as priority, a huge percentage of my department's legislative and drafting resources has been committed to this project, and it is actually, in fact, holding me up in other areas in which I would like to move, and I would like to deal with policy and get legislation in place and move on. So I'm absolutely not going to accept any claim that we haven't prioritised this work. It has been seen as a priority. Of course, it would be improper of me to be involved in debating the tiny phrasings inside a detailed technical and legal contract, which is what we were offering Kroger, and I would not be sat around the table doing those discussions. We have had excellent support from the Attorney General's chambers in this regard, and from our external consultants that are our industry experts in this. I have been apprised of progress 3 times a week. I have discussed it with officers on a regular basis. I received a number of briefings, and it is not at all fair on my department to say that this wasn't a priority.
Mr Morehouse, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the deadline was well known and we were getting towards it very quickly, was the Minister actually updated every day last week or more frequently? And is the Minister able to challenge the suggestion that Orsted's plans are being prioritised and that by the department, and that ultimately made Kroger's position impossible? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you. In fact, I'd like to reassure the honourable member that not only did I get updated every day last week, I got updated pretty much every 6 hours of every day for the last 2 weeks. This has been an ongoing thing, and officers and I have had discussions at weekends and through the evenings, and sometimes late into the evening around where progress was. So absolutely, we have been working very hard at this to try and deliver it. With respect to whether Orsted had been prioritised, that is categorically not true. Some of the legislation that's required, or would have been required, were Kroger going to progress, is also required with respect to Orsted as well, and so that legislation is still being worked on. Both parties have been treated fairly. I think the conflict, if that's the right word to use here, comes because on their original licence terms, Kroger should have been in production. If the gas was there, if they could find it, if they could manage to drill it, if the flow rates were right, there's lots of ifs around that, but they should have been in production by now. And so dealing with who puts where on the seabed, which is what we talk about when we're talking about coexistence, and which way do your cables go and which way do your pipelines go, would have been an easy option, because you could just looked at the plan that Kroger would have had for where their wellheads were and where their pipelines were. Because they have clearly failed to deliver the seismic surveys and the drill, and then asked about doing the other way round, which was unusual, as I said, and we had to take additional advice. Because they have failed to deliver that time after time after time, it has pushed them ever closer to a window where another operator wanted to be on the seabed. And had they stuck to the original terms of their licence, this would have been a moot point and we wouldn't have been discussing it. As those conflicts became apparent, my department, advised by the Attorney General's chambers, has worked then to basically treat both parties fairly and say, how do you share what is a great resource in terms of seabed and space for the island? How is that fairly shared between the companies, and how do they work together? And we have done considerable work in this space to make sure. So I'm going to refute any suggestion that Orsted have been prioritised. We've been working on both projects at pace, and as I say, this is actually almost hampering DOI's ability to do anything else, because there is so much work to be done in this space and we have been prioritising it.
Mr Glover.
Guru, my Lord, I'm just slightly concerned that all the blame is being pinned on Kroger here. Yeah. We missed a golden opportunity here, and would you expect Kroger to crack on to the original terms when we had issues with regulation, with compensation and timing, which are government issues?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think I've just illustrated that actually the timing definitely is not a government issue. Kroger could have moved and they could have done their 3D seismic survey, and had they done that and indicated that they were going to move on to drilling, we would have had the drilling regs in place. I'm certain to do that. Have we missed a golden opportunity? Government itself hasn't missed a golden opportunity. Government issued a licence to a company, a private company, that wanted to go and see if there was anything there that was worth exploiting. Is it a golden opportunity? I genuinely don't know, because without that 3D seismic data, none of the industry experts will guarantee to you that there is anything there at all. There may well be, and there may be nothing, and even if there is, there may be no flow from it that would be commercially exploitable. So actually I think it is not the fault of government. Government has bent over backwards and issued extension after extension to allow Kroger to get on with the job. And I actually wish they had done. I genuinely wish they'd got on with it, and they'd showed us what was there, shared their data, you know, and we'd have been able to know, because forever now there will be a question hanging over us about what was there. That will allow honourable members and others outside of this place to carry on charging that the government wasted some golden opportunity, when actually in reality none of us know for definite. And we will never know at this juncture unless somebody steps forward and funds those studies. Would I commit taxpayers' money to doing it? No. Because on the data I've seen so far, I'm not convinced that the chances are very good, and it's not our job to gamble with taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Question, Mr. Wallenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As somebody who has advocated for this project, I'm disappointed that this has happened. And I'm sure that I speak for the public that they will be deeply frustrated that this has happened. Could I ask the Minister, did Kroger require at any stage the Isle of Man government to underwrite their costs, and if so, to what extent? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Kroger indeed did suggest very recently to government that we should underwrite their costs of the work done so far, plus the seismic survey, balanced against whether we would deliver legislation in time. The value of that underwrite was £15 million. Now, I don't have £15 million sat sloshing around in my department. I wish I did. And as the honourable member will know, I don't think there's any ministers that would stand up and commit £15 million to a private company for doing something that is exploratory, it is a prospecting endeavour, and has no guarantee of any successful return. And so that was felt something that neither my department nor Treasury nor Coman were supporting.
Final supplementary, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shareholder and former member of this House, Chris Robertshaw, on the radio yesterday alleged that the DOI had moved the goalposts and introduced significant roadblocks to this project over the last 6 years. Does the Minister acknowledge that this is the case?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did indeed hear Mr. Robertshaw's allegations yesterday, and he's entirely wrong.
Turn then to our question time and start questions. The first is in the hands of the honourable member for Arbury, Castletown and Maloo, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Treasury Minister what plans are A, to put in place separate and direct funding for hospice, B, to increase that funding to expand palliative care, and C, to provide for future increases to be index linked. Thank you.
On the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. I'd like at this point to declare an interest in these subjects, as my wife is employed as clinical nurse specialist by hospice, and through my role as one of the trustees of the Henry Bloom Noble Healthcare Trust, substantial funding has been provided to the organisation. In my position as Treasury Minister, I have been approached by a number of third sector organisations regarding the possibility of direct funding. There has been some correspondence between the Chief Executive of Hospice Isle of Man and myself last October, and I've agreed to meet again in the near future. Hospice Isle of Man is an important independent charity which assists with the management of 49.3% of all island deaths. I'm aware of the existing shared funding and service level agreements with Manx Care and the commissioning of services both at Nobles Hospital, the hospice and throughout our community. There are no current plans to put in place separate and direct funding arrangements for hospice. I'm aware of the rising demand for the services that they provide, including those through the Rebecca House Children's Hospice, and the significant contributions they make to our island community. I note that there is ongoing dialogue with Manx Care about palliative care services and how these can both be expanded and adequately funded. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Jurisdictions such as Jersey are boosting their palliative care ahead of the introduction of assisted dying, and their contributions have increased quite substantially. Given the probable change happening in the near future, is this something that the Minister will consider, and is it something that could potentially happen in the near future? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for his question. It's quite clear that hospice, after a period during the COVID pandemic where they had to close down a lot of services, are trying to restart all those services and work closely with Manx Care to look at the increased provision of palliative care services both within the hospice, within our community and within Nobles Hospital. Because they are obviously quite staff-intensive services, I think they are feeling the pressure in terms of increased costs at the same time as reduced contributions through things like legacy. So I'm aware of some of these funding pressures, and certainly that is something that I know that Manx Care are also aware of in their ongoing negotiations with Hospice Isle of Man regarding the commissioned services and shared funding agreements. Thank you.
Mr Collister, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Treasury Minister. I think a number of members in this House went and visited the facilities not so long ago. Can I ask the Minister if there should be a very clear funding framework put in place? Because a charity waiting for weeks, if not even days, before getting announcements about what their funding could or the funding they will receive is totally unacceptable. I think there needs to be very clear time frame and a framework agreement in order to ensure the charity can operate in advance of a new financial year, and I'd welcome his comments on that.
Mr Triply.
Thank you much, Mr Speaker. I think I remember for his comment. I completely agree with him that any third sector organisation that's providing such essential services needs a clear funding arrangement, and I know that Manx Care have entered into multi-year funding arrangements with a number of third sector organisations with some index linking, and hope that can be agreed with Hospice Isle of Man in the near future. Thank you.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. Does the Treasury Minister acknowledge that there is the possibility of direct grants to statutory charities, to other charities, to statutory offices, because the Pink Book already includes a list of those bodies that get those direct grants? And secondly, does the Treasury Minister acknowledge that there is a risk that through going through middlemen like DHSC and Manx Care, it could be that that the hospice grant becomes the sort of residual amount of money, and it becomes the place that funds can be found for other causes that are perceived to be more important by the people in the middle?
Mr Triply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I think I remember for his question, he's quite right that there are various direct grants made for commissioned services by various departments, including Treasury, to third sector organisations. What the initial question was looking at was really is place separate and direct funding for hospice. And obviously, whilst he talks about middlemen, it is really important that as this is a healthcare service, it is properly overseen and commissioned by the Department of Health and Social Care and by Manx Care itself, so it can work in combination with our NHS to provide much needed palliative care services right across our island. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree that, given the challenges at Manx Care, that the Board of Hospice have actually got concerns about future income streams? And given the possibility of the separate funding stream, is it possible that hospice could have a similar position in the budget to Manx Radio currently has in terms of being a separate entity? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Triply.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his comments. I completely understand that the Board of Hospice Isle of Man would have concerns regarding future income schemes. That's not, unfortunately, unique to them. A lot of the charities that provide key services on our island are having similar issues. In terms of his analogies, Manx Radio, which is a trust now, which obviously is the public sector broadcaster, there is a direct grant to them in Treasury to provide those services. I would not imagine the same to be applicable to Hospice Isle of Man, because the hospice movement has always seen itself as being very strongly independent of both government and health services, although obviously having commissioned services with them and using that as a shared funding model. So I wouldn't imagine that they would want to be lumped in with the same ethos in terms of Manx Radio, but certainly from a Treasury perspective we are looking obviously at increasing the budget of Manx Care in the coming financial year, as we spoke about in another place only last month. And I think it's absolutely right that Manx Care look at their commissioned services with a range of third sector organisations, including Hospice Isle of Man, to make sure that they're providing the resources for those services to provide for our people. Thank you.
Mr
Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Minister, reflecting on the financial plan that was submitted to him by the Department of Health and Social Care, the plan that he has not received but is due to publish, whether the Minister can advise if the Treasury have been made aware of any concerns that either Manx Care or the Department of Health may have about an inability to continue to provide increased levels of funding to hospice to maintain the current level of services, let alone any potential expansion.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the honourable member for his comments. I know that Manx Care have talked about, within the funding envelope, the stresses of managing to increase funding to a range of third sector organisations, including Hospice Isle of Man, which obviously they contribute a significant portion of their ongoing revenue to. But there are other organisations as well which are equally affected as Manx Care try to fit within their allocated budget. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the challenge of actually working out how much extra hospice gets each year, could any consideration be given to actually giving it funds equivalent to the increase in social security benefits? Because that's something that's kind of worked out every budget in terms of what is required at that point. Is that something that could actually cross over? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Most of the social security benefits do increase in line with inflation, whether that be Isle of Man CPI in September or UK CPI in September, depending on how the legislation has been created. Certainly, I know that many of the charities have also asked for that index linking, but that often does not, particularly in terms of healthcare, meet the increased demands, particularly in terms of wage increases for frontline staff or some of the drugs and other supplies and the inflation that affects those as well. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister just confirm that in actual fact index linking has been applied in recent years to the Treasury grants that are paid and indicated directly inside the Treasury's pink book, and in fact that's a problem because it doesn't take into account the underlying costs that the Minister's just advised. It's just index linked from what they were set wrongly perhaps in the past. Second point is what the Treasury Minister said a couple of answers ago could have implied that Manx Radio is actually a government-controlled organisation, differently from the Independent Trust. I do like to bat for ministers when they put themselves in difficult situations, and could the Minister confirm that Manx Radio is completely independent of government and it's not the state broadcaster, it's the national broadcaster, the national public service broadcaster?
Not having a question about hospice turning into a debate about Manx Radio, no matter how much everyone would like it. Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think they'll remember, yes, some of the direct grants are index linked, some of them are linked with other parameters, and certainly what I said in my answer in terms of whether Hospice Isle of Man could have a similar funding model with Manx Radio, I pointed out the difference in terms of Manx Radio, in terms of its structure as a trust, and also in terms of its status as public sector broadcaster. Thank you.
Mr. Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to thank the Treasury Minister for acknowledging that the risk to future funding of the hospice has been highlighted to him by the Department of Health and Social Care, and also for highlighting that 49% of deaths on the island have in some way a connection to the Isle of Man hospice. But is he really standing here and telling this House that he is content to leave this critical issue entirely within the hands of the DHSC budget, despite the fact they have already made it abundantly clear to him that this will be inadequate?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his comments. In terms of the Department of Health and Social Care saying that the budget allocated to them in the 25-26 budget was inadequate, I disagree with him. I think it is a significant increase in terms of the money going forward. There is significant contingency funding there as well to deal with unexpected costs. But it is absolutely right that Manx Care and the department look at the range of commissioned services as they are doing with off-island referrals in the same way that they do with on-island care, and dealing with the third sector organisations that provide all of those commissioned services to our people here. Thank you.
Question 3. Call on the Honourable Member for Oakham, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for the Treasury, further to the written answer 2025011428, whether good governance principles have been adhered to where a supplier is not on the procurement portal.
And call the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. A supplier to the government not being registered on the government procurement portal does not automatically indicate the absence of good governance. Although the majority of government procurement is directed through the procurement portal, there may be occasions where a designated body wishes to procure by a different approach. For example, the Department may consider it to be more advantageous to procure via arrangements that have been put in place by public sector bodies in the UK. This is not uncommon in the health service sector, for example. Agreements of this type will have been procured in line with the UK procurement regulations and will contain governance processes specific to that agreement. In order to procure via one of these agreements, the Department would first need to obtain an exemption from financial regulations in order to procure outside the normal process, with each exemption request being considered on its own merits. However, if a contract with a supplier had not been procured via the procurement portal and is not covered by an exemption, then depending on the value of the contract, this could indicate the absence of good governance. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the Minister for that really helpful response. So how, when everything goes through his department for payment through the centralised payment process, how do these individuals get paid? And it was very clear in that written answer that the one particular company that has been procured through an NHS framework had not been paid through the normal channels because they didn't appear to be on the financial lists. Also, with regards to the NHS frameworks, who does the due diligence against them? Because the previous question that I asked to the previous minister back in July 2024 stated that Meridian were working at no cost, and then a later question in December said that they were now contracted. And I'm happy to share this with the Treasury Minister afterwards. Through the framework agreement reference number SBS 10197, this is very clear for all services using it that it's not to spend over 1.2 million on external consultancy per year, and that's any NHS trust in England. Would the Minister go back and check that Manx Care have not spent anything higher than an NHS trust on consultancy, external consultancy per year?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for a supplementary question. Again, in terms of the written question, this was very much about procurement rather than payment. And what we said was that we were unable to find any record of the supplier being registered with the government portal rather than any necessary payment. In terms of her comments, she's absolutely right. Manx Care uses a variety of NHS frameworks for procurement. These have been designed to support NHS organisations in their compliance, assessing an efficient marketplace, and it's been competitively established centrally. And Manx Care use the NHS Shared Business Services Framework Agreement, and the reference number she gives, SBS 10197, is about consultancy and advisory services for health. I understand that the contract to Meridian was awarded through this framework, and that's allowed because these frameworks have been produced by way of competition, and also Manx Care has procedural exemptions from the government's financial regulations to enable it to use such frameworks. I'm very happy to go back to Treasury and try to ascertain, at her request, that this hasn't exceeded the NHS maximum amount. Thank you.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and to the Minister for that helpful offer. A second question then, which I hope to get a positive response about that positive offer, is that can the Treasury Minister undertake to make sure that the principles, the good governance principles of procurement were followed in this place? And can the Minister advise whether my recollection is correct that good governance principles of procurement include the principle that the person who specifies the terms of reference shouldn't then carry on to carry out the terms of reference and perhaps continuation work thereafter? Is that, as my recollection of what the governance principles of procurement are, correct?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. In fact, those principles were exactly the topic of the question, the written question from the honourable member from Miss Edge, that was published on the 20th of February 2025 in terms of the involvement in some of the work and then involvement in subsequent project phases, looking at better governance and also better efficiencies within Manx Care. Thank you.
Mr. Glover.
Mr. Thomas is
Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's just really to pick up on that governance, and clearly this agreement through the NHS has a large number of suppliers on it, but we have picked the one that has offered to do initial 3 weeks of work at no cost to Manx Care, and they've then continued to receive a contract, it appears. But if the Minister could also commit to looking at this particular framework, because it doesn't say anything in it with regards to the consultancy work that appears to be being carried out in response to previous questions, which was to be looking at efficiencies and effectiveness, and certainly the lots in this particular framework do not appear to have it, and I will circulate that. So could the Minister commit, when he is doing the review as to how invoices have been paid, look at against this?
Members should quote from documents that have not been circulated by the clerk, by the Secretary of the House in advance.
So it's been mentioned previously in the House, Mr. Speaker, in a question. So
it's about the level of detail.
Okay.
Referring to it's one thing, but obviously it's unreasonable.
that's happy. I'm happy to circulate it to all honourable members.
One moment. Obviously, it's unreasonable for members to be able to engage in a question where they haven't actually seen the document that's the subject of it. That's all I'd say. Minister, you wish to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to answer the honourable member's supplementary question. In terms of some of these framework agreements, they're obviously in the United Kingdom, specified by the NHS, who do go into a lot of competitive tendering to get the list of names for providing various services to their NHS hospital trusts. It makes absolute sense for Manx Care and the Department of Health and Social Care, as well as other departments, to piggyback onto some of these agreements. And I know that various departments have done so as well, particularly Department of Home Affairs, to drive best practice but also best value for the Manx taxpayer. But I take on board her ongoing concerns regarding this and the number of questions she's asked about it, and so we'll certainly ask Treasury officers to look into the total quantum that's been spent on this particular contract. Thank you.
Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just if the Treasury Minister, I appreciate the written question was not with regards to the payment of invoices. Could the Treasury Minister commit to advise how a payment on invoices achieved via Manx Care through the Treasury? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, this is a direct payment, I assume, from Manx Care that would come through the normal processes in terms of their budgetary lines. Thank you.
Question 4, call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr. Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister of Infrastructure what licences, leases and agreements are in place for offshore renewable energy generation in the Territorial Sea, what the terms and conditions are for each, and what total revenue the Department has received from them since April 2014.
Yeah, call on the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you to the Honourable Member for his question. There is an agreement for lease, together with a draft lease between the Department and Dong Energy Isle of Man UK Limited and Dong Energy Wind Power AS, dated the 30th of November 2015. This is an amendment of the agreement for lease between the same parties that was dated the 20th of September 2017. Sorry, there is an amendment to that agreement that was dated September 2017. In relation to the terms and conditions, these are commercially sensitive because they relate to a live and ongoing agreement. The revenue received to date in respect of the agreement for lease is £91,800 excluding VAT.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the information about the revenue received to date ex-VAT. So 84,000 including VAT back in 2015 and 16, 24,000 including VAT back in 2017, 18, and nothing since. Can the Minister comment on the amount of money so far received in respect of this lease, which was helpfully provided in the Freedom of Information request just before Christmas, relative to what people might have expected to be received since 2014?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. I believe that the income so far is made of option fees to date, but there will be further income from this project, which I think is what the Honourable Member is alluding to, assess on the output from the wind farm when it's in full operation.
Thomas?
Thank you very much. Would the Minister kindly advise why the agreement for lease and the draft lease for the wind farm with Dong and then with Ørsted is commercially confidential and is private, whereas all the information for the parallel Kroger agreement is public, at least up until the second variation is published. We miss in public the third, fourth and fifth variations that were agreed. And secondly, what's the expiry of the current lease with Ørsted? Can the Minister at least advise how long this goes on for? That can't be commercially viable. It must be in the public interest to know that.
Minister to reply.
Thank you. Perhaps if the Honourable Member would like to share with me which specific parts of the terms and conditions or which specific areas that he's concerned about, then we can look to share those. The documents themselves, I believe, are fairly lengthy and unwieldy and have a great number of definitions in them which are quite technical in nature. But I'm happy to explore that further. As to the terms for the expiry of this, I don't have that information, but I can go away and find out and circulate it to members.
Ms Edge, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. For full transparency, the Minister's just said she will look at parts of and what could be published. Can she just be fully transparent and publish the whole licence available to the people of the Isle of Man? It's transparency that's being looked for here.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My advice so far is that they are commercially sensitive details. I will go away and consult with the Attorney-General's chambers to see what could be published and what could not. Thank you.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. So I didn't get a clear answer, but it sounds like the Attorney-General's got to be asked for the answer. So why is the Kroger document public, but the Dong/Ørsted document not public? Secondly, has the Minister seen this document? And if so, which other politicians have seen it? Which politicians signed it? And thirdly, can the Minister use this as an opportunity to update, given the revenues all in the future, how the contract for difference negotiations are going? There does seem to be some profound misunderstandings. So, for instance, Mr Robertshaw talks about a government subsidy, and the whole point of contracts for difference is, in actual fact, it's a private law contract between a low-carbon electricity generator and the low-carbon contracts company. So, therefore, it's the customer who pays. So, even if Mr Robertshaw, an expert in this area, doesn't understand, would it not be better for the Minister to provide an accurate update on where we are in terms of the wind farm?
Minister to reply.
I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, I might have lost my thread on the earlier two parts of that. Regarding contract for different negotiations, that is not something that I or my department are currently involved in. If you'd like to remind me of the additional 2 points you were making.
Speaker?
Well, I've actually been invited by the Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and to the Minister for that kind request. Basically, has she seen the contract? Will she ask the AG whether she can publish it in full? Because I do enjoy reading unwieldy, hard to get into documents, as the public do. And secondly, who signed it? Was it the Minister of Environment, Food and Agriculture at the time, who was chairing the Environment Infrastructure Committee, or was it the Minister of Infrastructure, or was it the Minister of Economic Development who were responsible for the energy project at that point?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. I haven't seen all of the detailed contract. I have seen some parts of it. I can ask to go and look at it if you like, and I'll try and decipher the signatures on the bottom. If the Honourable Member's interested, it is before my time and I'm unaware. As I've already committed, I will go and talk to the Attorney-General's chambers about what could be published from this document.
Final supplementary, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So would the Minister also confirm that she will publish the licence once she's spoken to the Attorney-General as soon as possible? And also, can she confirm, because the original licence, it appears, is still under the name of Dong, so has there not been an updated licence for Ørsted?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I will not confirm that I will publish it full. I have said I will go away and I will ask the Attorney-General's chambers about what could be published from it, and if their decision is, as the advice that I currently have, that it's commercially sensitive, then that will not be published. That would not be fair of me to do so. With regards to the name of the company, I'm unsure. That's the information that I've been given. I can go away and check that.
Turn to question 5. Call the Honourable Member for Arbury Castamley, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Treasury Minister what progress has been made with plans to modernise insolvency laws. Thank you.
The Treasury Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question and the opportunity to provide an update on this subject. A bill with the intention of modernising and consolidating insolvency law is part of the Treasury's current legislative programme as set out in the Ireland Plan. Mr Speaker, although the current legislation is still largely fit for purpose, it is also without doubt antiquated in places and difficult to navigate. As a result, Treasury undertook a consultation exercise in October 22 to establish some key policy objectives for a revising bill. Since that time, the Treasury has reviewed the feedback provided and worked closely with local industry representatives and with Finance Isle of Man in order to establish the most effective way of providing a more accessible and attractive insolvency framework for the island. As expected, this process has, by necessity, been extensive due to the complicated and technical nature of the subject matter. I can confirm that agreement on the scope and objectives of the bill have now been recently agreed, and discussions are currently underway with the Attorney General's Chamber to produce a draft bill. It would be Treasury's intention to then undertake a further public consultation on the draft with the aim of introducing a bill to the Keys by the end of the year in order so that it can complete passage before the end of the current administration. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. As part of the ongoing process, what assessment has been made of how the current legislation impacts on career options of local residents and businesses? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I think the main assessment is the difference in terms of our legislation with that on the adjacent isle, and therefore an element perhaps of some confusion in certain lenders as to the ability for debts to be recovered on the Isle of Man. As I said, the legislation we have at the moment, I think, is fit for purpose, but it is very different and needs renewal and updating so that various organisations can quite clearly see that the debt recovery process on the Isle of Man is sufficient for them to offer the range of products that they may be offering on the adjacent isle. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I think we nearly got there in the last answer, so there's a bit of crossover here. Just in terms of going forward, does the Minister expect that the new legislation will actually help people access greater financial products, but also have more manageable pathways out of debt? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for his question. Again, the availability of financial products is very much up to the organisations involved, but I hope that by establishing some new, clearer and up-to-date legislation in terms of insolvency, we can achieve that, certainly in terms of his other question about recovery of debt for people living on the Isle of Man. Again, the consultation back in 2022 was part of a wider three-phase project which started off with the Administration of Justice and Other Amendments Act 2021, which gave the provision to empower publication of publicly accessible register of debtors. Phases 2 are very much the reform of the insolvency and bankruptcy law, and then looking on to the law and functions relating to coroners. Thank you.
Question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much, and I welcome the memory of the Minister that this is a three-phase approach, started nearly a decade ago now, and at that time there was a private members bill that then had to be amended by government because the private members bill wasn't fit for purpose. Does the Minister agree with me it would be helpful to do two things? Firstly, to update members and the public where we are more formally, not just in an answer to a question about that three-phase project, because it's an incredibly important area. And secondly, before this project started nearly a decade ago, the previous project collapsed because of insufficient attention to including the right people in the working group. Can the Minister advise who's at the heart of all of this, who knows what's going on in terms of the drafting, and could it still collapse?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So I thank the Honourable Member for his number of questions there. In terms of involving the general public with the evolution of this legislation, as I said, a public consultation will take place on the draft bill, and we have been trying to work quite closely with industry regarding this through the working group, but also looking at third sector organisations as well who deal with personal debt and seeing how we can align some of the sometimes conflicting conflicting priorities between business and individuals to bring this forward. And I think it is important that we see this as a long-term process, but also involve all those people who not only will be affected by it, but also will be administering it. Thank you.
Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to ask the Minister about his timetable. So, from memory, the consultation on this phase of insolvency law reform was completed in February 2023. It was 2 years ago. The Treasury's original plan in their department plan said they were going to undertake this work and bring a new bill forward in the previous financial year, in the previous legislative year, the current year, I should say, actually. And now the Minister is saying it's not going to happen until, by the sounds of things, very early in 2026, which gives them not a lot of time to get this quite important piece of work actually through both branches of Tynwald. Is the Minister absolutely committed to making sure this happens? Because as has been referenced already, this project around insolvency reform has been going on for the best part of a decade, with very little progress having been made in the last few years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think, honourable member, it is one of my frustrations as well in terms of the length of time this project has taken to evolve, in terms of some of the previous problems that arose, where there were differences of opinion that weren't resolved properly, which led to quite significant delays in progressing this going forward. I think that those key principles have now been agreed, and I look forward to bringing forward a consultation on a draft bit of legislation, hopefully by doing the amount of work we've done beforehand, that will be welcomed by all those people involved, and then we can move forward with this. But I completely also understand this is a complex bit of legislation in the way it affects people and the way the priorities must be aligned in terms of protection for the various bodies involved, but also looking forward in terms of driving some of the improvements in financial services that a lot of our residents would like to see. Thank you.
And to question 6, I call on the Honourable Member for Arbroath Assembly, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Treasury Minister how the £400 million Sustainable Finance Bond is expected to be spent and how much remains with the Treasury from each category. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. The bond was issued in line with the Sustainable Financing Framework, which was published in September 2021 at the time of the bond issuance. The framework was established to align with the various principles set out by the International Capital Market Association. Details of how the £400 million sustainable financing bond was expected to be used was included in the explanatory memorandum of the motions in the June 2021 sitting of Tynwald. The net proceeds received were £393,380,000. The total sum of £78,975,115 was provided as a loan advance to the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company for the purchase of the Manxman vessel, and the original loan for the acquisition of the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company was refinanced at a sum of £75,354,000. The Manx Utilities loan advances used to fund their capital programme were refinanced at the sum of £176,754,921, and the remaining proceeds have been invested in the external reserves. The bond has been fully allocated in accordance with the requirements as part of the Sustainable Financing Framework. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Initially, the fixed sums went to the MUA and the Steam Packet. Only the remaining 50 million were for infrastructure. In terms of that remaining £50 million, how much of that remains available? And was all the money that was earmarked for the MUA and the Steam Packet, did that go as expected? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Honourable Member for his questions, because I must admit, taking over in terms of the Treasury and being responsible for us publishing the report in September 22 was interesting in the way that the Sustainable Financing Framework was created, that funds can be allocated and they can be used for refinancing or financing, and they go back 3 years backwards and 2 years forward in terms of the specifications of sustainable funds. And so in terms of his original question, in terms of the funds being spent, as I said, they were very much used in terms of refinancing and allocation, rather than there being an existing pot there that is still to be spent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. So this answer gets even more interesting, especially with that most recent comment. So can the Minister confirm then that in his view 150 million plus went to the steam packet of the bond and 176 million went to the MUA, and there's very little left in the reserves from the bond finance? And will that statement reconcile with the accounts, government accounts, and the accounts of the various bodies concerned?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, in terms of money going to various places, and this was very much in terms of refinancing those existing loans and debts. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the management of the investments, how is that done, and what information does the Treasury Minister receive on that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We're going a little bit beyond the sustainable bonds now, but the honourable member will know that in Treasury we have an investment committee, we have investment managers that look after the government reserves, the reserves of the country, the taxpayers' reserves, in terms of investing them to get the best return possible, with a cautious risk appetite going forward, so that there's considerable reserves that the Isle of Man has at the moment, which are currently valued at around about £1.87 billion, are used for the maximum benefit for the people of the Isle of Man. Thank you.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. So, so in September 2022, at the end of the first year, a report was published on the use of the funds from the sustainable bond under the framework, the ICMA framework. When can we expect our next report under that framework? Secondly, in that first report in September 2022, around 80 million was sort of allocated, committed, whatever the Treasury phrase is, to the national insurance replacement for the MERS and the salary replacement scheme. When will that money be transferred back into the national insurance scheme? And if not, when did Tynwald agree to that not being transferred back? And finally, thirdly, a couple of minutes into the Treasury Minister's statement at the government conference, he seemed to be of the view that government debt hadn't doubled from £500 million to £1 billion in the last few years, but changed his mind. Is that because of this fact that the sustainable bond was actually used for refinancing of steam packet or increasing steam packet's debt and refinancing Manx Utilities debt?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So I'm slightly confused by the honourable member's statements and questions. I assume that the £80.9 million that he's referring to is note number 11 in the September 2022 report, which really looked at the allocation to the Economic Recovery Fund and Economic Development Fund, rather than any specific reference about the National Insurance Fund. But I'm more than happy to discuss this further with him at a later stage if he'd like that clarification. In terms of his other question about national debt and me changing my mind, I don't think I have changed my mind at all. I think in terms of the audited financial accounts of the Isle of Man government, it's quite clear where that debt lies, and the initiation of the bond was not to try to increase that debt necessarily. It was basically to make sure that we had significant finance to drive forwards the ability to deliver on the economic strategy in the Island Plan. Thank you.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister confirm by refinancing the MUA, has that extended the life of the MUA loan and bond beyond what was originally supposed to be paid off? And also the refinancing of the steam packet, is the steam packet still on target to repay the loan that they had in the same specified period?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her questions. This was not in any way meant to refinance the bond issuance that are due for repayment in 2030 and 2034 by Manx Utilities. They have a bond repayment fund which is quoted in terms of the internal funds of the Isle of Man government, and they are on track to repay those. This was refinancing some of the other significant investment they've made into critical national infrastructure. In terms of her your other question in terms of the steam packet, again, with the steam packet annual accounts, you will see that they are repaying some of that debt and also repaying both the original debt and also the cost of providing for the new vessel and still building up some equity in terms of a replacement vessel as specified in the Sea Services Agreement. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With regard to the bonds, there was the initial expectation there would be annual reports. In terms of what Mr Thomas has made reference to, that we've had one report, are subsequent reports expected? And just in terms of the way that £50 million was actually invested, the Treasury Minister used the opportunity of the previous question to really provide reassurance about wider reserves, but in terms of the specific investment of the money from the bonds, how's that been managed and how's that been looked at and considered by the Minister? Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In terms of the investment of the bond itself, that is part of the investment of the overall general reserves. So it's not segmented or separated into that. There is a line, obviously, in the budget in terms of repayment of the amount of money it costs to service that debt, but it's invested alongside the other various strands of government reserves. In terms of his question about an annual report about allocation, it's my interpretation of the way that sustainable bonds are issued, that we do an initial allocation, and then if there is any substantial change to that allocation or a substantial change to the way that the bond is being used that might deviate from the underlying ethos of sustainability, then that would need further reporting. Thank you.
Final supplementary, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So, with regards to the refinancing for the steam packet for the MUA, but we don't appear to have had the same concern for refinancing the NI fund. So that 89.9 million for the NI fund doesn't seem to be an equivalent for repayment back into the fund, and could have been possibly from this because the money was taken out to make those payments. So I'm just unsure as to why the priorities for possibly areas where the funds and the bonds were not being the MUA fund particularly, it was used for other infrastructure projects, but by paying it off with a bond, has that increased the lifespan of those repayments for the individuals paying their electricity bills? But I don't understand why they've taken priority and we haven't repaid the money into the NI fund. You're pulling a face, Mr Speaker, if I said something I shouldn't have. Sorry.
No, I just couldn't fathom. Anyway, far be it from me to get into the weeds of a question.
Okay.
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I think it was last week that we had a particular question about meal and salary support schemes being benefits that were paid from the National Insurance Fund at a time of crisis for our island, and they were benefits designed really to support our economy and our people during a time of the pandemic, and they are very much coincided with the very ethos of the National Insurance Fund and what it was there to provide. Again, in terms of the sustainable bonds that we're talking about at the moment, the Honourable Member, Mr Thomas, has talked about money in there that was allocated for those payments of the benefits. When you look at the allocation, it was very much to support economic growth, to protect jobs, but doesn't mention any repayment to the National Insurance Fund. And as I said last week, the growth in terms of the size of the National Insurance Fund has continued since 2019. Thank you.
Now, Mr Thomas has advised that questions 7 and 15 are not to be asked today. Turn to question 8, call on the Honourable Member for Oldcombe, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care who the accounting officer is for the payment of invoices for services provided to Manx Care. Thank you.
The Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Chief Executive Officer for Manx Care is the accountable officer who is responsible for all aspects of compliance with financial regulations and is the budget holder for Manx Care. The Executive Director of Finance, Performance and Delivery provides support in this area, but the Chief Executive Officer remains ultimately responsible.
Supplementary question, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So it's a bit of a follow-on from my previous question with regards to the payment of invoices and how they are paid by Treasury. would the Minister confirm who actually... Is there a governance process in place before an invoice reaches Treasury, or can invoices go direct to Treasury?
Mr. to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, authority to agreed expenditure is derived through the Manx Care scheme of financial delegations. So it is the responsibility of the relevant delegated financial officer to review those invoices in line with the goods and services that have been ordered. That's all the information that I can give in terms of, obviously it comes through to the accountable officer, the chief executive officer, as I've said in my initial answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister could confirm how the budget is devolved down to Manx Care from her department, and with regards to the financial regs that get followed from that point on, is it purely just Manx Care's financial regulations, or is there practice notes, or are they following government good practice and due diligence and governance at all times?
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, so the annual budget is formally specified within the DHSC's mandate to Manx Care, which is laid before Tynwald. In respect of obviously financial regulations, Manx Care Manx Care obviously follow the requirements of the Manx Care financial regulations. So if the Honourable Member wants to just speak about which specific ones, I'd certainly be happy to come back to her if there were certain financial regulations that she had any queries about. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could also confirm if there was to be any breaches. I'm not saying there has been any breaches, but if there was to be any breaches, what would be the way that would be investigated? Would it be internal within Manx Care, or does it come back out and go to Treasury and Audit Advisory?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. So any breaches of the financial regulations should be reported as a financial irregularity in line with the requirements of the Manx Care financial regulations. Financial Practice Note 8.03 requires that all financial irregularities are reported to the accountable officer of Manx Care, the relevant budget holder and the designated finance officer, or alternatively the whistleblowing officer. If the financial irregularity involves either the accountable officer, the budget holder, or the designated finance officer, or the whistleblowing officer, then they should be omitted from the notification. If the finance irregularity involves the accountable officer, then the Director of Audit Advisory must be notified. The accountable officer is required to pursue all financial irregularities. The designated finance officer must notify the Director of Audit Advisory of any financial irregularities. In addition, the designated finance officer for Manx Care regularly reviews any outstanding irregularities with the Treasury Audit Advisory Division, and reports are provided to the Manx Care Audit Committee in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Turn to question 9, calling the Honourable Member for Glenfaber and Peel, Ms Lawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what progress has been made on the establishment of a housing association.
Calling the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for the question. The recently published Island Plan includes the following reference to the Housing Association. It states we will continue to work on the feasibility and structure of a housing association or similar, and will provide confirmation on the proposed model by April 2025. As members will note, I tabled to make a statement on housing at the April sitting of Tynwald, and I will not be preempting that statement.
Ms Lord Benham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The point really behind this idea, which has been going nearly for 2 years now, was to professionalise the operational side, to access funding streams outside government, and through a housing association model to progress the provision to meet a whole range of needs. I'm quoting from a clear intent. For example, key worker housing, subsidised packages for young families and first-time buyers, or those who needed new initiatives for more support for the elderly, homeless, or those leaving the care system. I'm still very keen to know, notwithstanding the statement that's coming in a couple of weeks' time, what steps have been taken since that intent that I've quoted there was announced in September 2024, if the Minister can kindly give an indication of some progress today.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Work has continued between ourselves and the Housing and Communities Board, and I will be in a position to update the member fully in April.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. There was, in Tynwald, when we last debated this, the idea that we should at least explore other options other than the option that the department preferred and council ministers preferred at that time, and those other options involve talking with the established housing providers, local authorities in other words, some of the local authorities at least. Has information that we can't have been provided to local authorities, housing providers, so that they can provide a informed comment on the proposals as they are, firstly, and secondly, is any legislation still envisaged to take forward the housing association idea, and if so, does it appear in either the primary or the secondary legislation timetable of government?
Minister's reply.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for his comments. We have, my department has recently been engaging more with local authorities about their housing. This is not a particular aspect that we've addressed with them. And with regards to legislation, there are, I have a suggested list of legislation that may be required depending on what options are chosen. Thank you.
Ms Lord Brennan, for the supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's really my understanding that ministers should answer matters that are within their cognizance or responsibility. So clearly the Honourable Minister must have some awareness, but she's declined to provide an update today, even in summary form. So I will just simply ask then, given that this has been going on for nearly 2 years now, if not more, and it's to do with housing, which is an important issue, she can advise the House today how many houses have been built by the Department for Infrastructure in the past 5 years, and if she can't, if she's happy to circulate that, along with the number of houses built by local authorities within the past 10. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the honourable member notes, I won't have that data with me today. It's not what the question was about, but I can undertake to find out and circulate it.
Supplementary question, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the Minister's just confirmed that she's been meeting with the local authorities, but she's chosen not to engage on the topic of a housing association. Can she advise why she has not thought that was a really important issue to bring up with our local authorities? And can she also advise, I don't believe there's been any policy decision and vote from this honourable place or the other place with regards to the Isle of Man progressing forward with a housing association.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I didn't confirm that I'd met with the local authorities. I said that we'd corresponded with them. I have indeed. I met with Onken commissioners last night, and the topic came up amongst other topics as well. So I haven't specifically engaged with them over this, but we are engaging with them more around housing, and particularly with the local government amendment bill that is going through. With regards to the second part of her question, can you just remind me?
Just with regards to actually the finalised process for a housing association, that's what's due to come back, I believe.
Thank you. The honourable member is correct that the House has not voted on any options yet.
Mr Thomas, supplementary question.
Thank you very much. So I think we need to get to the bottom of this. So can the Minister advise whether Port St Mary commissioners, Port Erin commissioners, Castletown commissioners, Peel Town commissioners, Onchan District commissioners, Ramsey Town commissioners, Braddon commissioners and Douglas City Council know more about the proposal for housing association than we're allowed to know in this place? And if so, which people at those housing providers know more than we are allowed to know? Is it the housing officers, is it the clerks, or is it the commissioners themselves?
Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, I can advise that none of them know more about you do in this House. Thank you.
Turn to question 10, calling the Honourable Member for Douglas. Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the Minister of Infrastructure whether discussions with Kroger Limited have concluded, what has been agreed regarding the matters announced as outstanding in December 2024, and what the new hydrocarbon licence end date is. I acknowledge that this question is similar to the urgent question, so obviously I had to express my surprise that that was necessary.
Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think I agree with the honourable member about the overlap between the questions here. So, as it is well known that the discussions between the Department and Kroger Limited concluded on the 28th of February 2025 when their board declined to sign an extension to the lease. Turning to the matters that were outstanding in December 2024, the parties to the Seaward Production Innovate licence were unable to agree on all the matters identified at the time requiring resolution and agreement. Those matters were around we'd agreed on that they could change the order in which they were going to do things. They had some concerns about coexistence and cooperation agreements, but they didn't express specific concerns around those clauses.
Thomas?
Thank you very much. So I think we need to make sure that we don't come to believe, or people don't come to believe, that Mr Robert Shaw's roadblocks are the same as the outstanding issues back in December. So my recollection is that the issues back in December were the regulations and related to the order, coexistence principles, and also due diligence, finance and technical. Can the Minister provide some information about any doubts that the department had in terms of the due diligence aspects, which was a matter that was identified as outstanding in her answer to me on the 20th of December?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for his further questions. A comprehensive agreed plan was put in place between the three departments that were involved in legislation and regulation around this area. It was time framed, it was deliverable, it was agreed with the Attorney General's chambers in the support that they would need, and external support was available to progress with that. So that matter we considered to be dealt with. The coexistence has been a long thing, and there seems to be some misunderstanding in that those coexistence arrangements have been long established. I think when faced with the reality of what that meant, there may have been some nervousness perhaps on the other party. However, from our perspective, that was a sensible and proportionate measure to include. And with regards to due diligence, we were at the time in December, we were settled on the level of due diligence that we've carried out. I believe there have been some changes to NSTA licences across in the UK that had given us some further cause for concern. My officers and team were investigating those, so we were revisiting that. However, the point is now moot as the licence has fallen away.
Thomas?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the frankness of the Minister in her reply, agreeing with my recollection of the three outstanding issues. Can the Minister undertake to keep the honourable members and the public informed about the developments across, because obviously it was a big thing to us, and the pitch made to us regularly by the people most directly involved on the other side of the licence, that NSTA had given them some sort of accreditation, which doesn't seem to be in place for very long. So I think we do need to know from the Minister exactly what the situation is. And secondly, given that quite soon we will have an estimate, as soon as the Minister has an estimate of the costs involved in Kroger's operation of its licence, can the Minister confirm that the information provided in that Freedom of Information case ID 4248334 remains accurate, which is the total revenue the department's received from the exploration for and exploitation of natural gas and petroleum to date, including VAT, is £36,740.20, most of which, 30,000 of which, was received before 2021, before COVID, or has the licence been paid subsequently for those missing years?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With regards to the NSTA, and we have been here before, that is obviously a matter that is for another jurisdiction, but members are welcome to go on the website and to review the updated information. I can advise you your search will return nothing related to this. With regards to costs, I have already agreed that I will be considering what the costs are and collating that information, and I'm happy to share it when it's available to members, and the information in the FOI remains correct to the best of my knowledge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the part of the question I want to ask about is what the new hydrocarbon licence end date is. Which new one, or is it the one that has now fallen that the Minister has just talked about? And can she also say, whatever that end date is, were the regulations in place for that licence to be, and the process within that licence could have been carried out with the regulations in place at the end date of that hydrocarbon licence?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can only apologise on behalf of Mr Thomas if the wording of the question has confused Ms Edge. There is no new hydrocarbon licence in existence. The one hydrocarbon licence, exploration licence that was in existence, fell away at 23:59 on the 28th of February. There are no new licences and we have no applications for any licences in process. Thank you.
Supplementary, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So there's no new licence. We know that one's fallen away, but the Minister is open to somebody coming forward with a new licence. Is that what she's just said?
Minister to reply.
To request a new licence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I said that there were no licences in the application. I was trying to give a full answer of where the position was. Currently, on my to-do list, there is nothing to do with hydrocarbon licences. This one has fallen away. There is no other work stream that's involving hydrocarbon licences on my horizon.
Final supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you. I think it's my second question, but that's all the only question I need. So the Minister, being very well informed and very well briefed, very quick to learn about all these things, will have noticed that the question, which was put in before, you know, the beginning of last week when the licence was still in place, is more or less identical to the press release that was issued around the 20th of December before the end of the year, when the purpose was to resolve the outstanding issues and to agree the new licence end date. So can the Minister in good faith advise that as recently as the 20th of December, in good faith, the Department was trying to agree an extension and to agree terms with Kroger Limited, Isle of Man, and there should be no doubt about that. And secondly, does the Minister agree with me that it would be good to have a full debate in Tynwald about the balance of the licensed field, which was licensed up until 2048 and can still be licensed in 2048?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In fact, I'm going to surpass the honourable member's expectations. I can confirm that until 11:49 on Friday the 28th of February, the Department was offering an extension to the contract to Kroger, and at that point we received an email telling us that their board had rejected that extension and would not sign it. So our drive to try and help them deliver on their project didn't cease until they decided that they were not going to sign the extension. As regards to a debate, if members want to have a debate about existing licences, I'm open to somebody tabling that. I would advise that there are some things that are commercially confidential in licences and that perhaps those things should not be debated. Thank you.
Turn to question 11. Call the Honourable Member for Castlemaine, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs how many traffic-related incidents in 2024 were in some way caused by the brightness of LED vehicle lights. Thank you.
On the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. An assessment of data related to injury collisions in 2024 has been undertaken by the road safety team. Data for non-injury collisions is not searchable within the system and would require manual analysis of a large volume of individual road traffic collision summaries. This is not possible within current resources without allocating officers away from active duties. The team found that there were no injury collisions where this factor was identified. Please note that the category searched for applies to all vehicle headlights, not exclusively LED headlights. The Department remains committed to ensuring road safety and will continue to monitor and assess factors that contribute to road traffic incidents, including those related to vehicle lighting. Thank you.
Now then, honourable members, having let that one squeak below the radar, your hour for questions has concluded. Mr Warrenberg.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would beg to move Understanding Order 351 that the time for oral questions be extended to permit the remaining questions to be answered at this sitting.
Mr Maltby.
I second.
Put the question that's the time be extended to complete the questions on the question paper. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. Ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr Morehouse, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I recognise it was a challenging question. We discussed it briefly last week. But several constituents have actually raised concerns about the challenge of driving in the evenings with the lights as they are. Is this something that the constabulary have considered or have concerns about? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, as I've alluded to, the data search has shown that no collisions had this as a factor. The licensing around vehicle headlights is a matter for the Department of Infrastructure, not the Constabulary. The Road Vehicles Lighting Regulations 2014, made by the Department of Infrastructure, are the regulations that govern vehicle lighting, including requirements around a steady light and colour of light.
And then to question 12, call on the Honourable Member for Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture when her department intends to publish a report on the school meals service.
The Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department intends to publish the report on the school meals review in the coming days. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Colster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister, in respect of school meals, if there's been a change of policy of what they actually do with any food left over at the end of the day?
Straying beyond the question which is about the report, Minister.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't catch the questions.
Yeah, apologies. I'm happy to ask that again, Mr. Speaker. It's basically in respect to school meals. I was just asking the Minister if there's been a change of policy in respect of what happens to any food left at the end of the day.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There hasn't been a change of policy as such, but the department has included a number of deliverable actions focusing on primary school menu within our department plan as a result of the previous review into school meals, and those actions do include reducing food waste, also undertaking a parental instruction survey regarding meal choice, plus reducing the use of ultra-processed food and increasing the use of local produce. But as yet, we have not made any changes that the member alludes to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rojas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's answer was reassuring in terms of she identified the coming days. Can she be any more specific? Because, yeah, the coming days could be any time in the future. But also in terms of the report, could she give us any indication of how long it's taken to prepare? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I say the coming days, I'm hopeful this week. I don't want to guarantee that because, as honourable members know, there are various competing priorities on a limited number of staff within the department. In terms of the school meals review, it was a lengthy document that required significant redaction ahead of publication. And as I said, resources within the department mean other areas had to be prioritised. But the redaction process has now taken place and final checks are being undertaken ahead of publication.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could confirm to members what the delay has been, because clearly back in last February, when she was a backbencher, she was asking about this report. Then we've had other times when she's committed to publishing it immediately on the website. Can the Minister confirm, I've checked the website today, it's clearly not there, but can the Minister confirm what the delays are? What has she been doing behind the scenes when it was such a top topic for her as Minister, and here we are a year on with no report?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I've responded to that. There are competing priorities on a limited resource within the centre of the department, and at times the department must prioritise different streams of work. Unfortunately, that meant the redaction of the school meal review was put on hold. But I can reassure the Honourable Member, whilst the report is not yet published, work has continued as a result of the report and actions committed to within the department's annual plan, as I've informed this Honourable House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's just touched on what I was going to ask there, and this might be a bit cheeky, but I'll ask it anyway. It's nice to have a report, but actually that doesn't mean anything. It's good to know what actions are going to follow. So can the Minister maybe outline what her plans are, what's next? Report gets published this week. Is there plans for a Tynwald debate, engagement with parents? Actually, what are the next steps the department's going to take, or is it her intention to simply publish a report, job done, move on?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we're publishing a report because there's clearly an expectation amongst members that such a detailed piece of work would be published. As I've said, the publication has been held up because of the need to redact some of the information contained within it. However, we have been able to digest what's in that report about the school meal review, and it is informing our policy. My priority focus, as it was, in fact, when I was previously asking questions about it and potentially prompting a review, is more to have a more narrow focus on the primary school menu, with those particular areas of reducing the use of ultra-processed food, increasing the use of local produce and reducing food waste at the heart of that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Minister just got in with her answer there in terms of, I was just going to ask, are there clear sections in terms of local produce and encouraging the use of it? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's quite a few months since I read the report. There are vast areas of information that are contained within it. I'm saying that this is the priority focus for me and the department members moving forward of what we would like to see in terms of addressing our primary school menu. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister's just confirmed it's a few months since she's read the report. The report was ready a year ago. It's taken a year to redact a report, but she's only read it a few months ago, so we're still waiting for it. But she's also just commented that there's going to be a narrower focus and more on primary. Can the Minister confirm what budget she has put to do this and to also use local produce?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Honourable Member will be aware, the competing priorities within the department on a small number of staff have meant that we, I would like to do all of this all at once. It is just not possible. And this potential project takes priority against the competing priorities within the department, and the highlighted actions are in the department plan, which I brought to Tynwald in November, and since then that has been our focus rather than the wealth of detail in the wide-ranging review that was undertaken previously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, the Minister, who's now responsible for delivering food, has just confirmed that she does not follow the policy that she had 12 months ago before she was a minister. So your priority for this particular report, to publish it when it's been ready for over a year, was to do redactions. And that hasn't happened in a 12-month period, Mr. Speaker. So can the Minister confirm when she seen the redacted report? Was it 3 and 4 months ago when she last read it? And also, can she also confirm what the budget is that's been put forward for the changes and this report that's coming forward to honourable members, and whether the department will still be heavily subsidising and has any funds come from anywhere else in government to provide Manx produce?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The report was an internal report that informs the department about a wide number of areas. As I said, the focus for school meals, particularly the primary school meals menu, is a matter that we have identified and is in the department plan that came out in November, and rather it went to Tynwald in November. The report wasn't redacted when I saw it. I read the 2 volumes of the report twice last year, many months ago, shortly after appointment and then after the summer, and they are informing the review that I want to see with a more narrow focus, hopefully with a view to be able to deliver some of those actions that we have identified in the island plan. And as I said, I've reiterated the priorities. I don't know what else I can say. This was an internal report. There isn't a big cover-up. It is really an internal report that informs the department policy, and we're moving forward. Yeah. And I do hope members enjoy reading it when hopefully it appears on our website towards the end of this week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question 13, calling the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr. Wanamaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister of Enterprise what progress has been made with digitising the company's registry and what the timeline is for implementing digital records and submissions.
On the Minister for Enterprise to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his question. The company's registry database is a bespoke system commissioned in 2015. Further investment was made in the system following the introduction of the Beneficial Ownership Act 2017, and again in 2022 after the political commitment to deliver an independently verified public register of beneficial ownership of companies. In December 2021, the Central Registry introduced a simple online annual return service, which enables companies to quickly and easily submit an annual return where no changes have occurred since the previous return. I'm advised that more than 40% of annual returns filed under the Companies Act 1931 are now submitted using this service. In 2023, the Registry also launched 2 interactive dashboards that provide comprehensive statistics on the nature of companies registered, together with data on processing times. Mr. Speaker, the Central Registry has continued to make progress in modernising and digitising its services to date, and I'm advised that further improvements are being introduced from the 1st of April 2025. These changes will include the extension of the Simplified Document Submission portal, which will enable any customer to submit company filings and make any associated payments through fully online services. I believe this will be a significant step forward and provide a more streamlined, efficient and timely process for service users. Thank you.
Mr. Wannenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Minister for his progress on that issue, and hopefully it will lead to a more efficient process. Could I ask him what systems are in place to screen company directors against sanctions lists, disqualification or prohibition notices to ensure compliance with the regulatory framework? Thank you.
Mr. Reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, international standards such as those set by the Financial Action Task Force are constantly evolving, and increasingly companies' registries are expected to play a greater role in preventing, detecting and combating economic crime. The role of companies' registries is shifting from merely being repositories of information accepted on trust to entities more akin to regulators or competent authorities. To fulfil this evolving role, significant additional human and technological investment will be required in the registry, and that is certainly something that is now starting as part of this broader issues around money value in other areas.
To question 14, calling the Honourable Member for Arbroath Assembly, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Chairman of the Post Office how many knives have been confiscated at the Postal Sorting Office in each of the last 6 months. Thank you.
On the Chairman of the Post Office to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for what's proved to be a very interesting question. I was quite surprised at the statistics on this. As of April 2024, Royal Mail in the Isle of Man Post Office prohibited the sending of bladed articles and bladed products as defined by the Offensive Weapons Act 2019 through the postal network. In terms of data regarding confiscated items of this nature, Isle of Man Post Office only holds the data log from November last year, but can advise the Honourable Member that between then and now, a total of 49 knives have been confiscated by the Post Office. Broken down by month, this necessitated Isle of Man Post Office to write to the following number of customers to advise that their items could not be delivered as they were a prohibited bladed item as follows. November last year, 12 customers, December, 4 customers, January, 4 customers, and February, 11 customers. However, I'd like to advise that Customs and the Isle of Man Constabulary also have the authority to confiscate and seize bladed items identified in the postal network if they fall into the illegal category, and therefore they could hold their own respective data in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair, for such a detailed answer. When a knife is detected, what action is taken? And is the Chair able to give us a little bit more information about the other agencies that are actually taking these knives? Do they just come in on their own kind of evidence, or is it, again, using the Post Office information? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman.
When the situation involves a knife classified as a prohibited item in the postal network, Isle of Man Post Office log the item and write to the recipient to advise that the item is a prohibited good and therefore has been disposed of. We also advise them that it's the sender's responsibility to ensure that the contents of their item comply with the regulations and suggest that the customer contacts the sender of the item in this respect. I wonder if this comes from an email that I had from somebody a while ago who'd had a kitchen knife confiscated and destroyed. And at the time I was very surprised about that and thought it would be an isolated incident. But the numbers that I gave you earlier on show that it's still a problem.
Mr Collister, supplementary question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I do thank my colleague from Arbury Castan Malou for asking this question, because it does relate to a pensioner who ordered some kitchen knives and then suddenly found and discovered that these knives have been confiscated and destroyed. Can I ask the Chair of the Post Office, can we just be very clear that he talked about bladed knives? Can he just be very clear to the public listen to this sitting that it does also relate to kitchen knives? And if that is the case, how, or is there any sort of way that people can order these online, or is it completely banned, or is everyone banned from actually ordering a set of kitchen knives on the Isle of Man? Thank you.
Kevin, reply.
My understanding, sir, is that a kitchen knife is a bladed item.
Well, I get that point. It's different to a Stanley knife.
I suspect that a spatula might well get through. I think that the regulations are, and this is the onus on this is on the seller to realise that they can't, under the regulations, send bladed items, even if it's something as innocent as a kitchen knife. And I understand the question and the questioner, in that it does seem a little bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. We don't have the same sort of knife crime that people suffer in the UK, which I think is where the initial law was changed to try and combat that. But my understanding is that no, you can't have bladed items, even fairly innocuous kitchen knives, sent through the post.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given this falls between various different areas of the government, is the Post Office in an untenable position of having to report the issue and having to inform the customer that their products will not arrive, and they will also be paying a fine, and there's no appeals process in place? Has the Post Office actually raised concerns about this, and is there any solution possible to actually help the organisation? Because it is difficult for them. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chairman.
Thank you very much to the Honourable Member for trying to help the Post Office. We appreciate it. There are very clear distinctions in what's classed as a prohibited item in the postal stream and what customs and the constabulary class as illegal items. Isle of Man Post Office is clear in its prohibited and restricted items list, which is published on the Isle of Man Post Office website, is referenced in the price guide and is available within the retail network. And I must say, I don't know where the education would best be placed on this. I know that if you try and order certain things from Amazon, for example, people won't deliver to the Isle of Man for whatever reason. And that should be the case in terms of bladed items.
Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm scared to ask this question because I'll get flogged again by the Chair. Again, what I'm trying to make, the point I'm going to ask here is for the Chair to look at. A simple inquiry back to the recipient of this order would have shown it was a very old-age pensioner who would order some kitchen knives in all good intention. Surely those knives could have been returned to the recipient once small inquiries would have been carried out. Can I ask the Chair to take away to actually at least make some initial inquiries before simply destroying things?
To reply.
I did take an interest when I got the letter from I assume it's Mr Collister's constituent about the kitchen knife, and I was told it's quite simple. The law is the law. The regulations are the regulations, and it's a bit like saying, you know, you've got a pensioner who's in a hurry, so therefore we shouldn't charge them with a speeding offence. The fact of the matter is that these are prohibited items, and that's the end of the matter as far as the Post Office is concerned.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if the Chair of the Post Office could confirm then, when they're delivering parcels for a third-party provider, do they not apply the same rules?
Chairman to reply.
I don't know, but I'll find out.
Turn to question 16, calling the Honourable Member from Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for the Treasury what Counties Department has taken of the Women Against State Pension Inequality campaign, how his department has assessed the quality impact of adhering to UK state pension rules, and if you will make a statement. Thank you.
On the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her question. Treasury has been following coverage of the WASPI campaign for a number of years and is aware of the latest developments. As it has been explained to this Honourable House and in another place, we are not in the same position as the UK Government as regards to this issue, as the Social Security Division of the Isle of Man Department for Health and Social Security, as it was at the time, conducted a more effective communication campaign with regard to the changes to women's state pension age brought about by the Pensions Acts of 1995, 1997 and 2011. In March 2024, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman published its findings after investigating complaints that since 1995 the United Kingdom Department of Work and Pensions had failed to provide adequate and timely information about changes to the state pension age for women. They found that timely and accurate information was available, but too many people did not understand their own situations and how the changes to state pensions would affect them personally. They also concluded that there was evidence of maladministration in the department's complaint handling overall. They published principles to remedy the situation where maladministration or poor service had led to injustice or hardship, but asked the Westminster Parliament to intervene and identify a mechanism for providing the most appropriate remedy. As yet, that parliamentary debate has not occurred, and I'm aware of the statement made last December by the Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall, who apologised for the delayed communications. Treasury is not planning to take any action in respect to the women affected in the Isle of Man, who were born in the 1950s, ahead of the UK Government doing so. As regard the Honourable Member's question regarding Treasury assessing the equality impact of adhering to UK state pension rules, she's aware of the public sector duty under Part 11 of the Equality Act 2017, but also the constitutional exemptions contained in Part 1 of Schedule 4 of the Bill of the Act in relation to legislation. Prior to 2016, many of the island's state pension rules were closely aligned with those in the adjacent Isle, but since then Tynwald has determined it should have more autonomy over a range of benefits provided for our Social Security Division. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Treasury Minister for that update. So we are all aware that the Westminster debate hasn't taken place and no decisions have been reached in Westminster, but has the Minister just confirmed that under our equality legislation of 2017, if Westminster was to say that a particular sum of money was to be made available to the Westbys, is he saying that he would use the equality impact legislation to not provide that for people on the Isle of Man?
Minister's reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. No, I wasn't saying that at all.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So therefore, it is a possibility, and usually for good fiscal responsibility, Treasury should have some assumptions or some impact assessments done on the possible impact and costs to the people of the Isle of Man. Could the Minister confirm, has that been done? Could he circulate the impact assessment if this was to become an equality issue and it needed to be paid, and could he circulate that?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Again, this question has come up previously, and the Honourable Member for Albury Costello, Mr Morehouse, asked the then Minister of Treasury back in the 26th of February 2019 about the number of women on the Isle of Man who were sent letters from the Director of the Isle of Man Social Security Division in 2009, and also the assessment of that. And I think it was quite clear at that time that there was no obvious correlation with what happened in the UK. Similarly, there has been no complaint to our own Ombudsman regarding the administration of these changes on the Isle of Man. Thank you.
Now, before I adjourn the House, I believe Mr Ashwood would like to make a brief personal statement.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just wish to draw the Honourable House's attention to the letter I circulated of the 25th of February 2025 in relation to a question from Mr Glover at the Keys sitting on the 13th of June 2023. Cabinet Office undertook to collate the answers to Mr Glover's question in relation to the number of employment tribunal and whistleblowing cases. In the circulated answer that was provided to members, which is reflected in the Hansard, the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture had listed itself as having one whistleblowing case. This has since been reviewed by the current Chief Officer of the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture, who was advised that this response was incorrect. The department at that time actually had 2 whistleblowing cases, so it is important that that is corrected on the record, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much. That then concludes the business before the House this morning. We are therefore adjourned until our next sitting, which is next Tuesday, 11th of March, 10 o'clock in our own chamber. Thank you.